the idea of this panel, for re-reminding us of the importance of bringing something that seems so obvious, that seems so deeply inherent to just the nature of who we are, into a discussion, and re-reminding us that that which seems so obvious to many of us may not actually be so obvious to all of us. Beginning with yoga, I mean, it's all yoga because it's all union, but beginning specifically with yoga, the sage Patanjali gave us 8 limbs of yoga. That's what Ashtanga means. Today, when we think about Ashtanga yoga, it tends to involve a specific practice of the body and the breath. But actually, the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, refers to the 8 limbs given by the sage Patanjali, which begins with the yama and the niyama, the do's and don'ts of how we live, and actually moves up through the postures. So asana is limb number 3. I won't go into all of this today, or that would take all of our time. But it ultimately brings us all the way up into the 8th limb, which is samadhi, that ecstatic union that yoga refers to, that oneness of the self with the divine. But the reason that I begin with this, and where I want to circle back to, is the yam and the niyam. That's the foundation of yoga. Asana, as I said, is only limb number 3. Pranayama is limb number 4. And anybody who's ever tried to build a house or a building of any sort knows you can't start on the 3rd floor. You can't start on the 4th floor. You need a foundation. And the foundation of yoga is yam and niyam. And there's 10 of them. There's 5 of each. And again, I won't go into all of those details. But if we just look at the very beginning, the very foundation of it, we begin with ahimsa. The very first of the yam and the niyam, the very first yam is ahimsa, non-violence. Then satya, truthfulness. Asteya, non-stealing. Apigraha, non-hoarding. And even if we end right there, if we end with 4 or even 3, even if we stop with asteya, non-stealing, if we simply adopt 3 of the 10 of the yam and niyam and we did nothing else, the problems that face our world today would be solved. Whether you look at terrorism, whether you look at war, whether you look at crime, whether we look at any type of violence, whether we look at what's happening to our earth, environmental destruction, whether we look at climate change, whether we look at world hunger, whether we look at our dissipating water resources, whatever we can think of that is wrong in the world today, it would actually be fixed if we simply adopted nonviolence, truthfulness, and non-stealing. And so for me, yoga is the foundation of all of this. And for those of us who are yogis, who practice yoga, it's critical for us to realize, as we've been saying all week, it's not just what I do on the mat. It's not about the strength or the flexibility of my hamstrings or my thighs or my knees. It's not about my waistline. It's not about how much I sweat. It's about union. And so how can we in our lives live in a way that is nonviolent, that is truthful, that doesn't steal, that doesn't hoard? And this is where it gets really subtle and really interesting. Because look, you've come to Rishikesh for yoga. You can learn yoga wherever you're from. There's almost no city in the world today where you can't learn yoga. But if you've come here, it's because you've been called by something much deeper than physical fitness. You've been called by something much deeper than advanced asanas. And so as we look at what that might be, it's actually the 24 hours of our lives. And it's actually how we eat, how we shop, how we dress, how we move through the world. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to give just a few very specific ways in which how we live impacts the world, and ways that we all have control over, that we all have a choice over, because not every one of us gets to grow up and be president of the world. Not every one of us gets to become president of a nation or CEO of a multinational company or found a huge NGO like Greenpeace. Most of us also have other jobs or other responsibilities or families or so many different things that pull at our time, at our money, at our resources, at our energy. And the question then is, well, how can I live a yogic life? How can I be part of the solution in the minutes or the hours of the days that I have? And the good news is we can be. Because the problems that we face have not been created by one or two people wreaking havoc on the world. It's been created by a collective disconnection, a collective dissociation from the very air that we breathe, from the water that we drink, from the womb of the mother in which we are living. And so, quickly, what we eat. Well, according to the United Nations, by 2040, the world is going to have half the water it needs. India is on track to be there by 2030. That's like today. 10 years is nothing. That's basically today. And the rest of the world is basically tomorrow. Blink your eyes, it will be 2040. 50% of the water that we need. Well, where is our water going? A lot of it is going to produce hamburgers and hot dogs and chicken McNuggets. Here we live on the banks of Ganga, and there's so much work that we do to keep Ganga clean and protect Ganga. There's so many ways it's impacted. The industries, the tanneries, the waste, the sewage. But for most of us, the most impactful way to take care of the world's water is actually simply to become a vegetarian. The amount of water that goes in the production of one meal of beef, so you sit down for hamburgers with your family, the amount of water that goes into that is the amount of water that you use in bathing for 6 months. Raise your hand if you bathe every day. Raise your hand if you bathe most days. And raise your hand if you bathe out of an actual shower head rather than a bucket. In India, a lot of us bathe out of buckets, but raise your hand if you bathe actually from a shower head that pours down on you. Okay, so the amount of water that you use if you bathe every day from that shower head is the amount of water that goes in the production of 1 pound of beef. 1 pound of beef. And what that means is, if you're going to go out and eat hamburgers, are you prepared to refrain from bathing for 6 months? Because that is actually what would be required to offset the water. So I'm not here to say become a vegetarian because the cow is holy. I'm not here to say become a vegetarian because animals are our sisters and brothers. That's something either you feel it intuitively or you don't feel it. But I'm here to say become a vegetarian because the world needs its water. Become a vegetarian because you're not prepared to go 6 months without bathing. And that's what would be required. And for chicken, by the way, it's a third. So for chicken, you'd only have to refrain from bathing for 2 months. Every time you go out and eat chicken, are you prepared to not bathe for 2 months? In addition to that, the amount of grain, wheat, rice, soy, corn, that goes in the production of 1 pound of beef is 16 times that which goes into the production of a pound of bread. So if I produce 16 pounds of grain, I can make 16 pounds of bread, of rice, of pasta, or I can make 1 pound of beef. Is there anyone here who believes that you are entitled to eat the food of 15 other people? Does anyone's religion or spirituality or internal sense tell them that I deserve the food of 15 other people? Because if it doesn't, then we have to be vegetarian. And again, it's not about the cow being holy. It's about people being holy. It's about starving children in Africa, in India, all over the world being holy and deserving their food. And so if we cycle our grain in such a way that 16 people's food goes into the production of my hamburger, well, that's not yogic. That's not dharmic. And so I share this with you not to make you feel badly, but actually to make you feel empowered, because who doesn't want to feed the world? And we actually have the power to do it. We produce enough grain to feed 10 billion people a day. There's only 7-point-something billion on the planet. Not one person needs to die of starvation, but tens of thousands of children die every day of starvation. More than 1 billion people sleep hungry every night. And we, sitting right here, have the power to change that. Just in what we eat. You don't have to be president. You don't have to form an NGO. We just have to live consciously. I could do this all day. I'm very aware of our time. I just want to add one last point to this, which is, in addition to what we eat, what we wear and what we buy, every single thing we buy is produced in a factory. Every single factory produces waste. Some of it goes in the air, some of it goes in the soil. From the soil, it goes in our water. Now, that doesn't mean don't ever buy anything, but what it means is, as consumers, we have power. There is a power of picketing, there's a power of Facebook posts, but I will tell you that the power of the dollar, the rupee, the euro, the pound is much more powerful than any picket sign, than any Facebook post. And if we are simply voting and changing and living based on picket signs and Facebook, we're not being nearly as powerful as we can. When we use the power of our dollars, our rupees, our euros, our pounds, and we purchase clothing, items, whatever we need to buy from companies, and they exist in every single sphere. Whatever you need to buy, from sweaters to toothpaste and shampoo and everything in between. There are companies that are doing that organically. There are companies that are doing that with fair trade. There are companies that are doing that without their waste, polluting our air and our soil and our water. And then there are companies that are giving us more for cheaper. And as long as our only goal is more, cheaper, 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 we are literally putting our money and our votes and power in the pockets of the people who are destroying the earth. And so every time you shop, instead of trying to figure out how much you can get for as cheaply as possible, realize there is a price tag that has nothing to do with what is sitting on your bottle of shampoo, but a price tag that goes back to the Amazon rainforest, a price tag that goes back to the ozone layer, a price tag that goes back to the waters of Mother Ganga and the 500 million people living on her banks. And realize that price tag of what you buy. And these days with the internet, it's very easy. I know that PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and now there's probably so many companies that put out literature on every item that we need to buy and which companies are doing it in a way that's environmentally friendly, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that doesn't use slave labor and sweatshops and child labor, in a way that's organic. Be conscious. This is the bottom line. We do not have a global food shortage. I don't care what anybody tells you. We do not have a global water shortage yet. We will, but we don't yet. We do not have a global land shortage. We have a global consciousness shortage. And as yogis, it is up to us to live consciously. And that's not just in our practices on the mat or on the cushion. It's in our meals, it's in our shopping, it's in our dressing, it's in every choice that we make, every minute of the day. And that is the power that we all have. Thank you.